Good morning, philosophers. Let's continue the depression chapter. We're just sort of skimming at this point. Nursed back to health, I think. Yeah. One of the most common obstacles to overcoming depression that sufferers insist on dramatic, immediate improvement. If this doesn't happen, they start to think it's hopeless, nothing will do any good. This applies to all emotional problems, but is particularly marked with depression. Marked with depression. At 31, glowing in soft pink designer sweats, Carla looked as if she had just stepped out of a health and fitness magazine. She was head nurse at a Fortune 500 firm. Evenings and weekends, she taught yoga at a health club. Carla described herself as terribly depressed and had begun to entertain thoughts of suicide. She likened her marriage of 4 years to a yo-yo. Whenever things start to go well, a crisis hits big time. We are going to skip ahead. Oh, a spicy section title. Stop depressing yourself. Depression can be mild or severe. The depressed person feels worthless, helpless, and hopeless. The severely depressed person sees everyday life as a living hell. Gloom and despair seem to pervade every waking moment, and preoccupation with suicide is common, sometimes leading to actual suicide. Severe depression restricts the capacity to enjoy life. The sufferer finds the things she used to really enjoy and look forward to, like a certain kind of food or music, no longer thrill or inspire. Everything seems flat and stale. Many people who have suffered severe depression for years report that they would rather undergo serious physical pain than the extreme mental anguish of depression. Some sufferers say and sincerely believe that they would do anything to escape depression. But there is something they can do. They can stop depressing themselves. This is easier said than done, but it can be done. It will very likely do little good, however, for the sufferer to take the obvious common sense approach of focusing his mind on cheerful topics. If, for instance, the sufferer keeps telling himself he is a worthless clod, he believes that he is a worthless clod, and this belief generates his depression. Making an effort to put on a happy face does nothing to combat this entrenched belief. It is more effective to challenge that false belief, not root it out, and replace it with a more... root it out, and replace it with a more rational belief using 3-minute exercises. Circumstances by themselves have no power to depress you. No matter how extreme the misfortune a person faces, the objective facts in that person's environment don't by themselves cause emotional upset. There are numerous examples showing the power of the mind to remain composed under any circumstances. Consider a few of them. Ingrid Bergman, the 3-time Academy Award winner and star of the classic movie Casablanca, said of her terminal cancer, "I have accepted it, and will make the most of what's left of my life while I can." Cancer victims who don't accept their fate, who don't learn to live with it, will only destroy what little time they have left. Bergman matter-of-factly accepted her pain-filled day-to-day existence and her imminent death. She went on to give an outstanding performance in her final movie on the life of Golda Meir. David Hume, the great Scottish philosopher who died in 1776, knew his death was coming soon and announced the fact in a good-humored short autobiography written 4 months before his demise. His doctor reported that at the end of his life, though very weak, he was quite free from anxiety, impatience, or low spirits. True, the individuals in these examples were faced with nothing worse than physical deterioration followed by death. Can people avoid being upset when they're in real trouble? What's not, if cancer's not real trouble, what is? What's the worst situation imaginable? Some would suggest that being an inmate in a Nazi concentration camp, physically abused and always under the threat of death. Yet we know from the reports of camp survivors that inmates in the same circumstances did not all respond in the same way. Some became anxious, depressed, frantic, or suicidal. Others behaved utterly differently, refusing to upset themselves needlessly about their plight. For evidence, see Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Okay. Skipping on to the next section that I think is important. Yeah, this is basically like the book is not really giving me a lot of new thoughts. That's why we're kind of shifting from reading every word to skimming and bungeeing in on important sections. This is just what I do. We're going to kind of fly through this book and move on to the next one because I'm already excited about the next book. 3-second knockouts. At this juncture, I decided the technique of the 3-second knockout would be helpful for Pamela. Here you devise a pithy, dramatic statement that challenges and contradicts a major irrational belief you're fighting. Throughout the day, when your mind is not otherwise engaged, meaningfully and persuasively say the knockout statement to yourself. The repetition will help reinforce the statement, etching it into your brain. Then, when musty thoughts appear, they can be quickly clobbered. For example, in Pamela's case, we devised the knockout statement. If I have hassles, I have hassles. If I have hassles, I have hassles. Too damn bad. I instructed her to repeat this knockout statement to herself throughout the day. To help motivate and focus her, we set up a goal. 100 repetitions each day. We got the knockout statement going around in her head so that it would eventually become part of the way she viewed hassles. Pamela reported that after hundreds of repetitions, this particular phrase began to get cliched and stale, so we devised another to use for variety. Hassles are only hassles, never horrors. For an entire day, she would use one or the other knockout statement, whichever seemed more meaningful to her at the time. Alternating between the two solved the problem of staleness. Pamela found the knockout technique particularly helpful. She got to the point where, as a result of using the knockout statements, she would stop upsetting herself about inconveniences for weeks. Okay, all right. Next chapter 8, overeating and smoking. It's all in your head. Okay. Well, smoking is a chemical addiction, so let's be careful of this all in your head. Maybe, well, I mean, I guess the chemical addiction is in your head too, so technically accurate. Starts with a quote by Frederick Bastiat. The very nature of man impels him to satisfy his desires with the least possible pain. They say that inside every fat person there's a thin person fighting to get out. In Susie's case, the thin person appeared to be losing the struggle. At 5'4", Susie felt she ought to be 130 pounds, but was actually closer to 160. Oh. Just about to turn 20, Susie looked older. She had deep eyes and smooth chestnut hair beneath her floppy leghorn hat. She wore a silk print dress with an enormous string of crystal beads. She had a lively manner and was ready to laugh, but seemed imprisoned by her excess fat. She was disheartened. I've tried dozens of diets over the last 5 years, and I work out four times a week, but I can't seem to lose weight consistently, and I'm heavier now than I was a year ago. And she describes her exercise routine. Then we go into... Susie was sincerely mystified as to why she could not manage to reduce. On one level, the answer was obvious. She was absorbing enough excess calories to outweigh the effects of her exercise. Susie immediately confirmed that she often yielded to impulsive temptations to drink too much alcohol and to snack on high-calorie foods. So the real puzzle was, how can someone with the drive and determination to stick to a grueling exercise program fail to control her eating and drinking habits? The answer is that addictions arise from addictive thinking. On her first visit, I gave Susie a personality questionnaire which confirmed my immediate guess. The test involved circling one of the 3 words often, sometimes, or seldom after each of 50 statements. Susie indicated often for these statements. I feel upset when things proceed slowly and can't be settled quickly. I feel upset about life's inconveniences or frustrations. I feel quite angry when someone keeps me waiting. I feel very sorry for myself when things are rough. I feel unable to persist at things I start, especially when the going gets hard. I feel excited and bored about most things. Oh, I feel unexcited and bored about most things. Low frustration tolerance. Susie was suffering from low frustration tolerance, a very common type of musty thinking which lies at the root of the great majority of overeating problems and other addictions. Low frustration tolerance arises from the third must, the belief that life must be fair, easy, well-ordered, comfortable, exciting, pleasurable, interesting, or hassle-free. In any situation where life does not conform to such demands, the addict compulsively looks for a quick escape from these unbearable circumstances. Susie told me more about her problems. She was moody and often depressed about weight, friends, and boyfriends. She had broken up with Sammy a year earlier, but continued to see him off and on. She had a demand about this situation. I must know for sure if it's on or off with Sammy. The power of negative thinking. A specific technique has often been found effective in undermining low frustration tolerance and thereby curing addictive thinking. This method is to maintain a clear and constant awareness of the disadvantages of any particular behavior or outlook. I explained the idea to Susie. Quote, "Whenever you do anything that is under your voluntary control, even getting out of bed in the morning, all the way to getting into bed at night, you make the decision to do it. And every decision largely consists of a weighing of benefits against costs, or advantages against disadvantages. When you get up in the morning, you're demonstrating that at that moment you believe the advantages of arising outweigh the disadvantages. Skipping breakfast, rushing to work, arriving late, and so on. If you had decided that the disadvantages of getting out of bed were greater, then you would have stayed in bed. This process, often operating semi-automatically, repeats itself throughout the day in making large and small decisions. It's exactly the same with your eating or overeating. When you choose to eat pizza or any other high-fat food, it's because you've decided for the moment that the advantages of doing so outweigh the disadvantages. Just before making such a decision, you might be thinking something like, "This pizza is fattening, disadvantage 1, but it tastes so delicious, advantage 1. I'll feel so good, advantage 2. I have to crave it, advantage 3. And I won't really gain weight because I'll diet later, discounting disadvantage 1. If you can convince yourself that the calculation is reasonable, and that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, you will indulge. If we can get you to realize strongly and clearly in such situations that the disadvantages outweigh the advantages, then you will reject pizza." Harnessing the power. How did I get Susie to remain convinced at the moment of temptation that the disadvantages outweighed the advantages? Practice, repetition, and reinforcement. Here are some of the most effective techniques. 1. List the disadvantages. I asked Susie to make a detailed and extensive list of the disadvantages of eating pizza. She came up with over 30 items, including, "It's fattening, I feel guilty afterwards, I could spend the money on something else, I'm more likely to become depressed, I'll be less healthy, it adds to my difficulty fitting into clothes." The longer the list, the more powerful the technique, even if some items are repetitive. Susie wrote, "I'll be less healthy, it will raise my cholesterol level, and I'll be more susceptible to some diseases." 2. Vividly read through the disadvantages. I advised Susie to read through the list of disadvantages every day and to spend some time dwelling on each item at its worst. For "it's fattening," she would picture herself eating while getting fatter and fatter until she became hugely obese, then getting fatter still and becoming increasingly uncomfortable because of her extra weight. 3. Practice imagining the disadvantages. Next, I asked Susie to adopt the habit of vividly reminding herself of the disadvantages of compulsive eating in situations where it was impracticable to refer to the list. When driving, while preparing or eating dinner, when walking down the street, waiting in line or on hold, she would vividly picture one of the disadvantages of pigging out. Susie liked to listen to music tapes while driving. We decided that when she first got into the car, she would spend a few minutes vividly imagining some of the disadvantages of overeating before she allowed herself to put on a tape. Referenting. I also explained to Susie the principle of referenting. Whenever she thought of junk food, either spontaneously or in response to some external stimulus, such as seeing an advertisement or the aroma of food, then she would immediately concentrate on some of the disadvantages on her list. The first day Susie began to use referenting, she was walking past a pizza parlor and looked in at the pizzas. She started to think about the tasty and pleasurable aspects of pizza, but quickly noticed the way her thoughts were going and deliberately reminded herself, fattening, unhealthy, feeling regret afterwards, I won't look good, it won't fit into my clothes. Consistent use of referenting caused Susie to have a heightened and more immediate awareness of the disadvantages of overeating, so that the temptation to pig out became easier to overcome. Meanwhile, Susie employed 3-minute exercises to challenge and topple her musts. We're not going to go into the musts or 3-minute exercise. Susie's setback. I was surprised and curious when Susie arrived for her 4th session with a down-in-the-dumps air about her. Gee, I really blew it, she announced as she flopped down in the chair dejectedly. In what way? Well, let's see. I left here on Thursday night, went straight home and watched some TV. All I had was an apple, a cup of decaf, and some popcorn. Oh yeah, some skim milk in the decaf, and that's it. Any butter, oil, or cheese on that popcorn? No, I just got a hot air popper, and all I put on it was a pinch of salt. Okay, great. Then Friday and Saturday went okay. Saturday I went to a club with Sammy, but didn't have any beer or wine. Sunday I had coffee with toast and grapefruit and a tuna salad for dinner. Sounds like an excellent week diet-wise so far. Yeah, I thought I was in control, but I don't know what happened on Monday night. I was feeling kind of crummy about work. I went out for lunch and had a salad bar, but I started thinking about the cherry pie on display, and I was feeling very low and thought I'd have just a little pie to feel better, so I got 1 slice. Uh-oh, I said, with a tone of mock dismay. Well, when I slipped up like this the time before, I just reminded myself as you told me. So I had a setback. Too bad, that's to be expected. I'll just get right back on track. And I just snapped out of it, and it was no big deal. But this time after the cherry pie, I was still feeling lousy, so I got another piece. Then I figured I'd really blown it, and I had cookies throughout the afternoon until I left work. Now I'm doing better again, I guess, but I'm still depressed about Monday. It sounds as if you basically did quite okay this week, except for that isolated cherry pie and cookies incident. But let's look a little closer at what went on in your head. You slipped up with the pie, which was natural. Yes, but the time before I recovered quickly immediately after the slip-up. Right, but what were you telling yourself this time after you finished the first piece of pie? I don't know, I think I was comparing my last quick recovery to this time. And was the I must recover quickly? Yeah, that was it. So you were telling yourself last time I immediately felt determined to get back on track, but now I'm still feeling lousy. I haven't recovered, and therefore I'm a hopeless failure, so I'll just be fat for the rest of my life. Okay. Alright, moving on. More on low frustration tolerance. Almost always, achieving a long-term goal entails facing immediate discomfort. When we begin to pursue such a goal, we judge that the outcome is well worth the cost, but then somewhere along the line we get sidetracked. Since the cost is immediate and the benefit distant, it's easy to give in to the impulse to escape. Later we regret deeply that we have failed to achieve the desired goal. All this is perfectly natural and to be expected. If Tom keeps putting off studying for an important test in favor of watching movies, or if Sheila, who dreams of being a concert pianist, starts to skip practice to talk to friends on the phone, there is no need to introduce far-fetched, unconscious explanations. To propose instead that Tom really dreads becoming a doctor because he identifies that profession with his father whom he hates without knowing it, or that Sheila unconsciously fears the plight of a concert superstar making millions from recordings, is fanciful in the extreme. The universe simply isn't constructed in such a way that working toward an important objective is bound to be intrinsically delightful. The principle that applies in most arenas of life is the rule familiar to athletes and sports trainers. No pain, no gain. Schools teach addictive thinking. Unfortunately, our culture reinforces the... What's up?
Oh, shows me my level.
Okay, when I'm done with this recording, I will look up your Minecraft level finding techniques. You can stay in here until I'm done reading if you want. It's gotta be quiet though, okay? Unfortunately, our culture reinforces the opposite and potentially disastrous viewpoint. Fashionable discussion of education policy, for example, sometimes implies that learning ought to be sheer effortless enjoyment at every moment. Certainly, a skillful teacher will try to make the subject matter attractive and will know how to stimulate the student's interest, but nothing worthwhile can ever be pure fun. Certainly not science, math, English, foreign languages, music, engineering, economics, history, or philosophy. Effective learning cannot be immediately pleasurable at every stage. Success requires that students apply themselves and work hard, especially when it hurts. The worst hit victims of the learning is fun theory are often those from poor or disadvantaged backgrounds, because they are less likely to pick up at home the habits of discipline and application, which many middle-class students already bring to school with them. Not only does the learning is fun fallacy tend to destroy scholastic achievement, it may reinforce low frustration tolerance in every other aspect of life, and hence encourage addictions. School administrators who seek to remedy poor scholastic performance by making students feel good instead of fostering self-discipline and rigorous academic standards may indirectly be stimulating their students' interest in taking drugs. By contrast, our children would benefit from being shown role models who forge ahead in boring, unexciting, uncomfortable conditions to reach a valuable goal. It would be best to tell our children, life consists of one hassle after another, but you can cope and you can derive deep satisfaction from overcoming those hassles. To accomplish anything worthwhile is going to be hard, tedious, and unpleasant at times, but you can do it. Only babies demand that every minute be free of discomfort or frustration. Grown-ups tolerate frustration and realistically endure it as an inherent aspect of life. And we're going into another story about John and frustration. 3-minute exercises for John. 3-minute imagery. After John had written out a 3-minute exercise, I instructed him in 3-minute imagery. Step 1. Vividly imagine, picture, or fantasize the following. You are in a situation where you feel tempted to smoke, are relaxing after a meal, tense about a job interview, or bored with nothing to do. You're experiencing a distinct urge to smoke, but you resist. Step 2. Now, as you vividly imagine this, allow yourself to feel anxious, depressed, or agitated about not lighting up. This is the same inappropriate emotion you normally feel whenever you find yourself in the situation in Step 1. Do Step 2 for only a few seconds. Step 3. Still picturing the scene described in Step 1, make yourself feel concerned, disappointed, or appropriately frustrated instead of anxious, depressed, or agitated. Since you create and control your own feelings, with persistence you can modify them. That is a powerful couple of sentences. How can you make yourself feel concerned rather than anxious, disappointed? How can you make yourself feel concerned rather than anxious, disappointed rather than depressed, or appropriately frustrated rather than over-frustrated? Show yourself that you can stand frustration even though you don't like it. Convince yourself that no law of the universe says you must have a cigarette merely because you strongly want one. Remind yourself that discomfort and deprivation are just that and no more. Never awful, terrible, or horrible. John diligently practiced 3-minute imagery for 3 minutes twice a day. After 6 weeks, he had completely weaned himself from his tobacco addiction. 2 years later, he reported that he was still cigarette-free. He had one relapse after 8 months, but had quickly gotten back in control. Okay, all right. Next chapter is chapter 9. Panic attacks. See how that goes? Most people would think those are involuntary. He's just slaying all the sacred cows. Stop giving yourself panic attacks. Oh, man. Is he going to actually say that? We'll have to wait and see. All right, guys. Whew. I'm going to... I read way too long today. So, I'm going to get my day going. Have a great day, guys. Be productive. Kick some ass.